So I've been in the business as a real estate investor for the last 10 years, and I want to share with you, 5 mistakes I've made over these years. And so let me break those down for you. But before I do, I'm doing one video a day for the first 100 days of 2025. And the goal with these videos is just to make sure that they are practical, inspirational, insightful, and they can help you along your journey. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you do so now. All right, let's jump into these mistakes. Obviously, no one's perfect, right? We all make mistakes. But this was actually fun for me to revisit over the years some things that I've done. So let me kind of start simple. One of the biggest mistakes that I made was basically when it came to education. It's not lost to me that this is a form of education here, right? But when it came to education, I had two modes where I was all well, let me say this. I was all action but no education. So early on, I wasn't, I started taking action, but I didn't know what I was doing. And that actually, thankfully, I didn't get too hurt from doing that. But that's like being a bull in a china shop, right? Like you are a threat to yourself and others. And so thankfully, I was only using my own money. And so I was not pitting other people, for example, other people's money at risk, things like that. And I wasn't pitting, like, for example, tenants at risk. It was live in flips or flips, right? So, with that being said, on the education side, you don't want to be all action, no education, because you don't know what you don't know. And although you can make money in real estate, and although you can make a lot of money, you can also lose money and lose a lot. And so, you want to be very careful. Part of your job as an investor is to mitigate risk. And so, one of the best ways to mitigate risk is with education. Yet, on the other side, I then swung to another, part where I was all education and no action. I'm an avid learner. You can, if you're watching this video, you can see behind me, I have about over 3,000 books. I attend still 10 years in, I still attend over sometimes 6 to 10 conferences a year. But at the end of the day, I love learning, but I can't be all education and no action. There were times I had to shut myself off from attending the next conference because yes, it is a great networking opportunity, almost like a reunion with friends, and obviously I get to travel with it, whatnot. But at the same time, I had to cut myself off and said, "Hey, if I'm not hitting these metrics, these goals, these milestones in my career, then hey, we're not going to another class." There's a level that you have to almost force yourself and force your hand to get certain results versus just being all education. At a certain point, the rubber needs to meet the road. And so, that's the first one. You want to be careful to not get in that analysis paralysis stage or just that I don't need any help. I got this, like chaos mode either. So that's one of my first mistakes. It's one that no matter what, even at different levels, I have to be careful that I'm not just assuming I know what I'm doing or that I'm, being so dependent on education, I'm not actually getting out there and doing things. So no matter what, this is something that can trickle in at any point, and so you want to be mindful of it. All right, the second mistake that I made was that early on, I bit off more than I could chew renovation wise. Uh, so I remember my second deal, I remember it had a plate size hole in the wall and there was, some termite damage. And so my first rehab was very cosmetic based. It was not crazy as far as the rehab goes. But then my second one, we literally, I underestimated the termite damage, and it ended up being where we touched three of the exterior walls and into the trusses, into the roof. And so, meaning what used to be a small, side plate size ended up being a large portion of the house. Obviously, that was a big deal. It blew my budget completely, it doubled it. And so, guys, be careful with things like fire damage, water damage, termite damage, foundation issues, like a major gut rehab. You want to be careful, especially early on, to not bite off more than you can chew because again, there's a lot that you don't know. And especially in those beginning years, I'm not a big fan of folks um, just doing, big rehabs to do them. You should ease your way into them because there's a bigger propensity for you to get hurt there. Again, I ended up losing money on that deal. Thankfully, the market was still going up. And that was one that I was able to go ahead and only lose a little bit. It was like if I remember, it was like 4 to 6 grand. And so thankfully that was something I was able to recover from. But still, some people 4 to 6 grand can knock them out. But imagine if it was 40 to 60 grand. That's a different story. All right. So be mindful. It's not, you don't want to just wait for, paint and carpet, because those are rarely discounted enough for the numbers to make sense. And so it's rare that you get them repeatedly. But then at the same time, you don't want to be jumping into full gut day one as you're starting out as an investor. And so those are things that you want to just keep in mind. Maybe it's your capacity. Maybe you're like, Courtney, I know how to do a full gut. But maybe right now life is crazy. Maybe you just got a new parent is very sick, or you just got, maybe you have more kids now. Whatever that may be, you just want to be mindful, because ultimately you don't want to um yeah, you don't want to like basically shoot yourself in the foot. So keep that in mind. Don't bite off more than you can chew, rehab wise. All right, the third one. Man, this was a hard lesson. So my third mistake that I made over the years was that early on, I was focused on, and I was focused on what I call today money, basically profit. So I was flipping and wholesaling a lot. And so what you don't want to be is all today money and no tomorrow money. And tomorrow morning money is going to be things like that come from rentals, right? So I was in the early days, I was doing a ton of flipping and wholesaling, but I wasn't keeping any rentals, right? The downside with being all today money is, number one, Uncle Sam really takes a chunk of that tax wise. If you know, you know. So one of the benefits of tomorrow money is, tax benefits. But I was doing all that and I wasn't letting what I call let the clock tick, right? And so we'll talk about more of that on the next mistake. But the reality is, I was so focused on all the today stuff, I wasn't doing anything to plan for tomorrow. And then, but then there was a time, really, a few years into it, I started having this realization like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have been keeping some along the way. And then I almost did this huge pendulum swing to where I was in all tomorrow money and I wasn't a lot of today money. And that was actually causing me issues, because obviously you got to put food on the table today. And so you want to be careful to not be too much into one extreme. My friend Chris Rude talks about this in a great way in our podcast. And I'll link that here in the video. It's, today money, you've got, he calls it slow, medium, and fast money, that you need to know when to have, how much in each bucket over time and when to progress. To It's really difficult if you're in the beginning and all you're doing is tomorrow money, especially if you don't have your today money figured out. So that's something that you definitely want to keep in mind. When I was doing real estate full time. This is very different if you have a job. If you have a job that can handle your today money and you can then focus all on the tomorrow money. But so many people are enthralled with the idea of doing real estate full time that they then are forced to make real estate cover their today money too. I'm not against doing real estate full time, but I will tell you it makes the journey harder, because you then also have to cover today money as well. Those are just some thoughts. Maybe you said, Courtney, I'm married and my spouse can cover our today money and I can focus on the tomorrow money. Again, that's a different story. But my mistake was I was a sole income producer for myself, right? And I jumped off early. I left my job, which in hindsight, I feel like I left it too soon. And so then I was forced to create both today money and then eventually tomorrow money. So keep that in mind. And a huge part of that is, well, let me tie this one into that one. That I wish I would have started sooner owning rentals, because one of the biggest benefits of rentals is when you let time pass, because with passing, the value goes up, the mortgage is getting paid down, stuff like that. And man, I wish I would have started sooner. I just if I can give anyone advice, it's to work towards starting that clock sooner. And look, that means buying a property and holding it, not buying and selling and trying and starting again on this new one, this, that. You need the benefits of time to start versus just, and especially depending on your age, it can vary greatly. But mean, one of the hardest thing is if you've got a short amount of time, you need to start ASAP. All right, the fourth mistake that I had when it came to rentals, I very early on bought more rentals than I had the reserves for. What does that mean? So my rentals, I've always bought them with creative financing or private money. Okay. So non-traditional means of financing, which means I can get into deals with little to no money. But here's the issue. I believe that yes, you can get into deals with little to no money. Thank you, creative financing and different deal structuring paths. But at the end of the day, it is hard to stay in owning properties with little to no money. So, for example, when I first started, I bought a handful of properties from one owner and I bought them subject to the loan. And so I had multiple rentals day one. But I did not, and yeah, it cost me I remember 4 grand to go to the closing table, which I was like, yeah, I can do that, right? I can scrounge together 4 grand. But the issue was the money that I needed over time. These were inherited tenants. I did not spend a ton of time doing due diligence on the tenants. Guess what? Guess who didn't pay? And when they didn't pay, guess who had to pay for that mortgage? Me, right? That came out of HIP National Bank, right out of my pocket, right? And so there's a level there that you've got to keep in mind, that there is a level that you need reserves for vacancies. So when either the property is vacant or the tenant's not paying, maybe they're still in there, but they're not paying. That happened to me. Or for repairs. Again, I had one tenant that was just calling and calling and calling about repairs. It was like it was his first time renting somewhere, and it was like he was so scared. He just kept calling about everything. And so, where do those repairs come from? If I didn't have money in the bank for reserves, it came out of my pocket. And so, you want to be careful to not buy more properties, more rentals than you can than you have the reserves for. And this is not sexy. People are like, no, Courtney, everyone needs to get into deals with no to low money and they need to buy all these properties and they shouldn't be required to, have some money in the bank. Well, guess what? Those are usually the people that I buy from, right? Because you need, and I preach this all the time on my channel, is that you need to have a plan to acquire the property, but you also need to have a plan to keep the property, to manage it. And so that's going to include things like reserves. Some people have varying different beliefs around reserves. That could be anything from I need 10,000 per property. You know, it could vary. But there is a level there right now. I'm near 60 properties and I'm starting to sell because my reserves have been depleted because of this challenging market. So what am I doing? I am sell there, and these are properties I don't want to keep. Like, know that. There's some properties that I only wanted to own for a period of time. Well, there's some that I'm going to be selling. There's things that I'm going to be doing to help relieve that, right? You don't want to buy more properties than you have the reserves for. So keep that. Those are hard lesson to learn. So many investors are cash poor, and that can really hurt them. So be careful. Don't let that be you. All right. The last and final lesson that I learned over the last 10 years as a real estate investor, the mistake that I made was that I went, when it came to vendors, partners, very different folks, I went with who was familiar with, not exactly the best job. That's actually a tough thing to say. So what you want to know here is, in the real estate world, we love giving referrals. Hey, like this is who I use. You should, like whether it's for a contractor, handyman, insurance, title company, real estate agent, property manager, you name it. But guys, keep in mind that just because you're most familiar with them does not mean they're most, skilled and they're best at what you need them to do. Right now, I've got a mobile home park that we are selling. Well, I know plenty of real estate agents that would love to have that listing, but yet they don't know the first thing of being able to list a commercial deal, to list a mobile home park, and or to be able to list something, for example, that's more investment versus residential retail. And so the reality here is you want to go with who is best qualified and skilled versus just who you're most familiar with. I think that's a really bad habit that people have in general, and I've noticed it myself, and I've had to learn some hard lessons because of it, especially in this changing market. It is necessary to have skills on your team. Guys, these are my some 5 lessons. I hope that you can learn something from them. so you don't have to pay the education tax I had to pay on these mistakes. Look, learning is costly, but trust me, you're going to pay it one way or the other, right? So find ways to learn from others' mistakes because you can shortchange that cost from yourself. It might just take you the time to watch this video. It might be the cost to attend a workshop. It might be whatever that may be, right? The time, the cost for lunch to go sit down and learn from someone, whatever that looks like. It might be like the cost, educational cost in that sense, time or money, or both. Or it may be the cost of the mistake. Oh man, I had no idea. No, I had no idea that that was an issue, and now you are $2,000 in the hole from a mistake made on a property, whatever that may be. So, all right, guys, that is another video, another thought, another lesson. Hope this helps you. Please try to avoid the mistakes. Look, we're all human. You're going to make them at some point. Let's try to make them as educated as possible. Okay. All right, guys. See you tomorrow for another video. Appreciate you tuning in and subscribing.